On this Friday night, long weekend warning. The last hurrah of summer doesn't spell the end of COVID-19.
Now is the time to get serious.
What health officials want you to avoid. Our interview with America's top infectious disease doctor, Anthony Fauci's fears.
And we can have some significant problems.
And his reality check on when a COVID-19 vaccine could be ready. Recognizing the rights and wrongs of historical Canadian figures.
It's not black and white, it's gray.
The push to present the good, the bad, and the ugly from our country's past. And Raptors' rapture.
Got it!
The buzzer beater we can't stop watching.
Global National with Dawna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. As we head into the Labor Day long weekend, it may feel like the last gasp of summer before we begin to hunker down for fall and winter. And as much as we all want to forget about COVID-19, now is not the time. In several provinces, the daily number of new cases is already on the rise, and that's before schools are fully reopened and before the weather changes and we need to spend more time inside. So you may not want to hear it, but this is the message about big parties this weekend.
Anyone who's thinking they're having a big shindig this weekend, forget about it. Cancel it. Folks, just follow the protocols. I don't care if it's those doobies, joints, whatever you want to call them, or drinks or rain. Just don't share them. Simple. And wear a face covering.
Ahead of the weekend, Quebec, Ontario, Alberta, and BC remain the key provinces of concern. Today, there were 184 new cases reported in Quebec, 148 in Ontario, and in Alberta, 164 more people tested positive today and 121 in BC. There is some good news. The recent spike in cases has not led to a similar spike in hospitalizations. Since the peak of the first wave in spring, there's been a steady decline of people in the hospital and in ICU with COVID-19. A big reason for that is many of Canada's recent infections have been in younger people who have mild or no symptoms. That is great, but the risk is they can spread it to others who are more vulnerable. Listen to BC's public health officer.
We're at that limit. We're at that precipice, if you will, where we need to take the actions to ensure that we can move forward into the fall and keep our curve low.
In the U.S., there are still roughly 40,000 new cases of COVID-19 every day, and the leading American expert on infectious diseases, Dr. Anthony Fauci, is nervous about that. Fauci, who is on the White House Coronavirus Task Force, would like that number to shrink to below 10,000 daily cases, and he's anxious about how Americans will behave over the Labor Day weekend. Fauci spoke to our Washington bureau chief, Jackson Proskow, who's with me now. Jackson.
Dawna, like many scientists, Dr. Fauci worries that the worst is yet to come this fall and winter as a second wave of the virus coincides with the seasonal flu. And so I started by asking him about a new projection, a new COVID-19 model here in the U.S., which forecasts the number of deaths in this country could more than double between now and January to 410,000.
Well, it is a concern because, you know, if you look at the background, the baseline of what we have, it's unacceptably high. So what you would have liked to see, like, for example, New York City metropolitan area got hit very badly. There was a period of time there where 50% of all of the cases and hospitalizations were coming out of the New York metropolitan area. But when they went up and peaked and came down, they are now at a very low baseline, like 1% or less positivity. But if you look at the country as a whole, our baseline is very, very high. And right now, it's about 30 to 40,000 or more cases per day. If we go into the fall with that high level of a baseline, then you add the risk of indoor activity because of the cooler weather, then we can have some significant problems.
You know, I know a lot of Canadians are watching the situation down here in the U.S., and they're very worried about it. And there certainly doesn't seem to be a huge appetite, for example, for reopening the border. But I'm curious, your perspective as a medical expert, is there still a benefit in travel restrictions? Do they serve a purpose at this point in controlling the spread of the virus?
You know, in some respects, it does. I mean, if you have an area, a country as a whole, or an area of the country with very, very low activity, obviously there's concern about letting people in from the outside, other countries in which there's a high rate of infection. You know, sometimes it does have a positive effect of keeping the lid on things. But sometimes, you know, it just doesn't make that much difference. So there is always this argument as to the benefit or not of doing that. People will still argue on either side of that.
When we talk about a potential vaccine, and there seems to be optimism about maybe identifying a successful candidate by the fall, but can you put that in realistic terms?
Yeah.
What does that actually mean realistically for rolling out at mass distribution?
You can start thinking about the deployment of that vaccine at the end of the year, the beginning of the first quarter, the first half of 2021. And as we get well into 2021, there likely will be enough doses for everyone who needs it, because the companies are talking about pre-making ahead of time hundreds of millions of doses.
It almost feels like there's sort of two different message tracks out there right now. On one hand, there's a lot of hope about a vaccine perhaps being ready, at least by the fall, and advances in therapeutics. And on the other hand, you know, fears of a second wave, for example, and the rising rates that you mentioned. And I'm curious if that confusion, if you worry that that's going to lead to a sense of complacency among the public.
You know, we've been going through this stress and strain, you know, everything from the economy to interruption of regular services to just the fatigue of having to be locked down to a greater or lesser degree. You know, ever since February and March, it's now September, and we're still in that boat. So I'm concerned that people are going to get so discouraged, they're going to loosen up the kinds of attention to public health measures, which we need to continue to focus on if we're going to keep this under control.
And we know things are reopening on different timelines in places in Canada and the U.S. And so I asked Dr. Fauci if there's one thing he will refuse to do, even when he's allowed to. He said unequivocally he will not go into a bar even when they reopen. He said there's simply a bad idea no matter where you are, because as the drinks go down, the masks come off, and the social distancing pretty quickly disappears. Dawna?
Okay, Jackson Proskow in Washington, thanks. Avoiding crowded bars is advice that's worth repeating. In Quebec City, a karaoke bar has become the epicenter of what public health officials call a super spreader event. As Mike Armstrong explains, it's also a cautionary tale ahead of the holiday weekend.
There's a sign on the door at Bar Le Kirouac in Quebec City that says simply closed until further order due to the coronavirus. But health officials this week are warning the problem was actually COVID-19 and karaoke.
It's very important to say right now, hey guys, it's dangerous.
Officials say a night of sharing microphones and singing at the Kirouac was a super spreader event. 58 cases have been traced directly to patrons from one night, August 23rd. But it didn't stop there. It was passed from patrons to at least 10 other people, including 3 children at 3 different schools. Add to that, dozens of people who came into contact with them who are now home as a precaution.
The cases are increasing every day, and this is not good news.
Quebec's health minister is warning the public that things that seem innocent can be dangerous, whether it's karaoke or a backyard barbecue. He says there was a case this week north of Montreal where a simple dinner party for 17 people turned into 14 positive tests.
For Labor Day weekend, I would just ask everybody to pay special attention the way you meet with your neighbors, you meet with your family.
Schools in Quebec started reopening last week. The province now says 47 have had coronavirus cases. But so far, there have only been a couple of schools where people actually contracted the virus. In most of them, it was caught somewhere else, taken into the school, and didn't spread past that one person. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Montreal.
There's a snapshot of job growth in the U.S. and Canada tonight. Canada is just over 1 million jobs away from reaching pre-pandemic employment levels. Nearly 250,000 jobs were added in August, most of them full-time. The unemployment rate dropped from 10.9% in July to 10.2% in August. The jobless rate is higher for racialized workers. Stats Canada says Arab, Black, and Southeast Asian Canadians continue to have the highest unemployment rates. And employment for Indigenous people living off reserve decreased by nearly 2% last month. The American unemployment rate dropped below 10% in August. It fell from 10.2% in July to 8.4% in August. 1.4 million jobs were added in August. That's the fewest since the pandemic began. And about half of the 22 million jobs lost since March in the U.S. have now returned. Women who took the biggest employment hit have made the biggest rebound, and people of color continue to face a worse job market impact from the pandemic recession than their white counterparts. In the U.S., President Trump and his aides are scrambling to defuse the fallout from a scathing report that claims he's called fallen American troops losers and suckers. The allegations he denigrated American soldiers were made in the magazine The Atlantic. The article quotes 4 anonymous sources, and among their claims that Trump called off a visit to a cemetery of American war graves in France in 2018, reportedly asking aides, "Why should I go to that cemetery? It's filled with losers." On Memorial Day in 2017, Trump visited the Virginia gravesite of his former Secretary of Homeland Security's son, who was killed in Afghanistan in 2010. The article claims Trump said, "I don't get it. What was in it for them?" Trump has called soldiers losers before. This is what he said about Senator John McCain, who died 2 years ago. McCain was a decorated Navy veteran who spent years as a prisoner of war in Vietnam.
I supported him. He lost. He let us down. But, he lost. So I never liked him as much after that, because I don't like losers. But Frank, let me get to it. He hit me. He's not a war hero. He's a war hero. He's a war hero.
5.5 years.
He's a war hero because he was captured.
Today, in the Oval Office, Trump said this about the Atlantic article.
No, it was a fake story written by a magazine that was probably not going to be around much longer.
And his Democratic rival, Joe Biden, whose son served in Iraq, his reaction was scathing.
When my son volunteered and joined the United States military as the Attorney General and went to Iraq for a year, won the Bronze Star and other commendations, he wasn't a sucker. The servicemen and women he served with, particularly those who did not come home, were not losers. If these statements are true, the President should humbly apologize to every Gold Star mother and father and every Blue Star family that he's denigrated and insulted. Who the heck does he think he is?
There are new developments tonight in a global news investigation about conduct in the RCMP. For the first time since a lawsuit was launched alleging top leadership in the RCMP ignored complaints about Cameron Ortis for years, a former top cop is responding. Ortis, you'll remember, was the senior intelligence official with the Mounties who faces criminal charges. He's accused of selling top secret intelligence. The new civil suit launched this week alleges Ortis bullied staff, targeting the same employees whose top secret intelligence reports he allegedly sold or offered to Canada's enemies. Now, former Commissioner Bob Paulson says he never protected Ortis from any complaints, though he says they had a friendly relationship. Abigail Bimman has been looking into what's going on. Abigail.
Dawna, Bob Paulson declined on-camera interviews, but in a series of emails with Global News reporters, he was defensive. He told us he was feeling, quote, set upon by you people. Several sources tell Global News Ortis and Paulson were very close, and Paulson was key to Ortis's rapid rise within the force, while Paulson paints a different picture. I never personally promoted Cam, and he never worked directly for me. My relationship with Cam was friendly, and as I've said, I was always impressed with him. I note that up until his publicly announced arrest, I had no inkling that he was suspected of having done these criminal acts, or that he was managing poorly, or that he was a bully or had harassed anyone. The lawsuit alleges formal complaints about Ortis began in January 2017. Paulson retired later that year. The plaintiffs say they continued to raise concerns until January 2020, when the force launched an internal review that ultimately found management failed to act. Global News spoke with a retired civilian member of the RCMP who knew two of the plaintiffs.
I highly respected their work. They are excellent intelligence analysts and very experienced intelligence analysts. If the allegations that they are making are true, and I have no reason to disbelieve them, they have been treated absolutely abominably by the organization.
And Angus Smith, who also worked in the same department as Ortis for years, says he wasn't surprised by the lawsuit's allegations of inaction. He's seen a number of red flags get ignored.
And in my 30-year career, that was certainly a pattern that I did observe.
Abigail, what about those in charge at the RCMP right now? What are they saying?
Well, this week, the RCMP told Global News they're launching a management action plan in response to that internal review. But that report was handed in 4 months ago, and the RCMP is not offering any timeline for action, nor did they answer questions about whether they have or will investigate claims of favoritism. And then there's current Commissioner Brenda Lucki. While neither she nor Paulson are named as defendants in the case, there is a specific allegation she ignored email complaints about Ortis from one of the plaintiffs. We asked the RCMP for a response from Lucki to that direct allegation, but we're only told they won't comment on matters before the courts. Dawna?
All right, Abigail Bimman in Ottawa, thank you. The search continues in Beirut. Coming up, still holding out hope a month after the deadly blast. In Beirut, searchers have been digging for more than 30 hours now, holding out a tiny glimmer of hope someone may still be alive, trapped in the rubble after that massive blast a month ago. Searchers, including a team from Chile, detected what they think were signs of life in the rubble of this building. Special sensory equipment picked up a pulsing signal, what could be a heartbeat. They were first alerted to the area by this sniffer dog named Flash, who's become a bit of a hero in Beirut. Searchers brought in scanning equipment to create 3D images of the wreckage and a camera. So far, they found no one.
We have been able to acquire precise three-dimensional data, and so far this has not shown any body inside.
People have gathered to watch, and there are calls for silence every time the searchers need to listen for signals. They say they won't give up until they know what they're dealing with. Today, a moment of silence was held in tribute to the nearly 200 people killed on August 4th when a warehouse at the port full of ammonium nitrate detonated. A home in Oshawa, Ontario has been cordoned off by the police after 5 people were found dead inside the house early this morning. Police say 4 men and a woman are dead, including the gunman. At least 2 of the victims are minors. Investigators say they were all from the same family. A 6th person, a 50-year-old woman described by police as a mother, is recovering in hospital from gunshot wounds.
It was quite a chaotic scene, even for the residents in the area. A lot of callers calling in stating that they were hearing a lot of the gunshots, a lot of screaming coming from this residence.
Investigators are looking at whether a white Ford pickup truck with Manitoba plates might be connected. And this afternoon they found what they call an unknown device inside the house and secured the area. Police say there is no ongoing threat. Still ahead, how a Canadian cemetery is reframing history to reflect a fuller picture. The toppling of Sir John A. Macdonald's statue in Montreal sparked a debate over who we choose to honor and how we explain the full picture of their past. Michael Couteur has the story of one cemetery that's found a way to add context that reflects reconciliation.
In a city of monuments, there's a renewed debate over how to honor the accomplishment of historic Canadians while acknowledging their dark history. Perhaps the answer lies with Beechwood National Cemetery's plaque program. Years ago, it started reframing legacies like that of Duncan Campbell Scott.
Yes, this person was a phenomenal poet, but yes, he instituted a system that killed children all across Canada.
Scott was the Indian Affairs Minister under Prime Minister John A. Macdonald and was known as the architect of the residential school system. Following the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, Scott's plaque in the cemetery was changed to reflect that fact.
It's not black and white, it's gray. And that's where people really have to understand that history should be sort of understood in the gray area.
Those gray areas appear on several bronze plaques that dot the cemetery, while others herald the heroes of the time. In 1922, Peter Henderson Bryce wrote a report calling the residential schools a national crime. It was ignored and dismissed by the government. That report was published in this building just steps away from Parliament.
When do Canadians have an opportunity to learn from their true history in a way that builds a better country going forward?
Cindy Blackstock wants a plaque to be put on the James Hope and Sons building.
I think people have a different reaction to actually looking at a building and can imagine for themselves someone walking in there with a report that could have saved thousands of children's lives had the Government of Canada only listened.
It's one of 8 buildings on a self-guided walking tour of reconciliation put together by the First Nations Child and Family Caring Society. Blackstock wants the government to recognize the buildings and the unsung heroes of the time.
As we go forward, we need to be very mindful and make more space for these people whom we've largely forgotten in the past.
At the same time, the government continues to grapple with the uncomfortable truths about Canada's founders and how to reframe their legacies to include the good and the bad. Michael Couteur, Global News, Ottawa.
Next, that buzzer beater.
.5 to go in Game 3. OG with a look. Got it!
I know you've probably all seen it already, but can you watch this moment enough? With half a second left on the clock, Toronto's OG Anunoby calmly sunk that three-pointer and walked off like it was no big deal. Toronto beat the Boston Celtics by 1 point and kept the Raptors' dream alive in the NBA playoffs. Just remarkable. And that is Global National for this Friday. I'm Dawna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is the sun setting over Jones Lake in Moncton, New Brunswick. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again next week. Take care of yourselves and have a lovely weekend. Bye-bye.